The sun poured through the sheer curtains, painting golden lines across the living room floor. I stood by the window with a cup of coffee in my hands, watching the kids next door chase each other, their laughter riding the breeze. The world outside felt simple, uncomplicated. But inside me, a fog of uncertainty swirled. My husband, Barack, sat in the armchair, a tablet in his lap. His fingers scrolled absent-mindedly, but his gaze was distant, lost in thought. He wasn't reading, I could tell. Something weighed on him, something he hadn't yet found the words to express. On the sofa, our cat, Tabby, lay curled in a sunspot, her white fur glowing. Her tail twitched slightly, as if she sensed the tension between us. Tabby was always attuned to my moods, a quiet guardian of my peace. "Jessie." Barack's voice broke the silence. He looked up at me, his eyes a mix of hesitation and resolve. "We need to talk." I set my coffee down on the windowsill and sat across from him. My intuition whispered that whatever was coming would change us. Tabby stretched and hopped onto my lap, her paws kneading my jeans, grounding me in the present. "What is it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Barack took a deep breath, his fingers tightening around the edges of the tablet. "I've been thinking about us. About our marriage. About how we could be living. I feel like there's more for us to explore, something deeper we haven't touched yet." His words were careful, like he was picking his way through a minefield. "I want to share something with you, but only if you're willing to hear it." I frowned slightly, my heart beating faster. Was he unhappy? Was this the beginning of the end? "Go on," I said, stroking Tabby's soft fur. Her purring was a steady rhythm, a reminder that this was still our home, our space. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his eyes meeting mine. "It's a fantasy I've been having. One where I see you, through someone else's eyes. Where you're free, and I get to experience that freedom with you, safely together." His words hung in the air. I searched his face for any sign of disrespect or doubt, but there was none. Just curiosity, vulnerability, and a hope that whatever this was, we could face it side by side. The room felt quiet and fragile, like glass. My mind raced with questions, but surprisingly, I wasn't angry. If anything, I was intrigued, not by the fantasy itself, but by his willingness to share something so intimate, so risky. Tabby's purring grew louder. Her small, solid weight reminded me that this was real life, not a dream or a threat. "I don't know how I feel about this yet," I admitted. "But I appreciate your honesty. Let's figure this out together." Slowly, relief softened Barack's expression. The tension in his shoulders eased. Just a little. "We'll go at your pace," he promised. "This is about us, not just me." In that moment, I realized this wasn't about breaking something. It was about building something new. Trust wasn't static. It grew, it shifted. Maybe this was just the next step in our dance. Barack's hand found mine, warm and steady. The fog inside me began to clear. This was still our journey, and we were still holding on. Tabby leapt off my lap and sauntered toward the hallway, her tail high, as if she knew her job here was done. We laughed softly, the sound breaking the glass-like stillness. For the first time in weeks, I felt like we were on the same path, a path we'd create together, one careful step at a time. The evening light faded slowly, turning the walls of our living room a soft shade of amber. Barack sat on the couch, his shoulders tense, as if he were carrying a weight he couldn't shake off. I watched him from the kitchen island, stirring a cup of tea I didn't really want. A small succulent sat beside me, a miracle survivor despite my lack of a green thumb. The silence between us stretched thin. I knew I had to say something before it snapped. I set the spoon down, walked over, and sank into the couch beside him. Tabby, ever the intuitive cat, leapt up and nestled between us, her tail flicking softly against my leg like a metronome. "Barack," I said gently, breaking the silence, "tell me more. What exactly do you imagine? How do you see this working?" He lifted his eyes to mine. There was something raw there, a vulnerability he rarely showed. I realized then how hard it must have been for him to reveal this part of himself, to expose a desire he wasn't sure I'd understand. "I don't know all the details," he admitted, his voice low. "But it feels like an exploration, something that could make us closer. I want to see you light up, to watch you from a different perspective. But only if you're comfortable. This has to be safe for both of us." I nodded, his words sinking in. We'd always prided ourselves on trust and openness. Maybe this was his way of deepening that bond, not breaking it. "I need to understand how this works for me," I said after a moment. "I don't want to feel like I'm losing control." "You won't," Barack promised, his hand closing around mine. "This only happens if we both agree, step by step." Tabby stretched out between us, as if to remind us of the balance we were trying to maintain. Her presence was a quiet assurance, a reminder that trust could be both strong and delicate. We talked for hours, about boundaries, feelings, and what safety really meant. I marveled at how natural the conversation felt, despite its unusual topic. Maybe that was a sign of how strong our foundation was. We could discuss even the most fragile ideas without fear of collapse. "I don't want to lose what we have," Barack said suddenly, his voice trembling slightly. "This isn't about replacing anything. It's about finding something new together." "I know," I replied softly. "We just need to be careful. Like walking on a tightrope." He nodded, gratitude and relief flickering across his face. We were both scared of the unknown, but we were willing to face it together. I thought about how many couples avoided these kinds of conversations, fearing they might shatter what they'd built. But wasn't true balance about testing its strength? If our foundation was solid, it would hold. And if it wasn't, better to know now. Barack picked up my abandoned tea and took a sip, grimacing at the bitterness. I laughed. "You've never liked green tea. Why are you drinking it?" "Because you drink it," he said, grinning. That simple statement held so much truth about us. We were willing to try new things, even when they were uncomfortable, just to stay connected. Our love wasn't static. It was alive, flexible, and growing. I leaned back, letting the warmth of the moment settle over me. Tabby jumped off the couch and padded toward the window, her tail swaying like a pendulum of quiet confidence. "Maybe we start small," Barack suggested. "Imagine it first. Like a rehearsal. No pressure, no reality. Just us, exploring together. Like improv." I teased. "Exactly. A safe stage where we're in control." I considered his words. It felt like a manageable first step, exploring without risking anything real. We could play with the idea, knowing it was just a scenario, not a commitment. "Okay," I agreed. "But if I feel uncomfortable, I'll say stop, and you'll stop." "Of course, Jesse. This is our dance. No one leads unless we both want to move." The room felt warmer, the air lighter. We hadn't stepped beyond the familiar yet, but it felt like we'd unlocked a door to a new part of our relationship. As I switched off the lights, I saw Tabby perched on the windowsill, watching us with eyes that seemed far wiser than they should be. She knew we'd be okay. And so did we. A soft breeze played with my hair as I stood on the shores of Lake Michigan. The water lapped lazily at my feet, leaving a thin film of foam that quickly vanished into the sand. The waves seemed to mirror the swirling uncertainty inside me. Barack and I had taken a rare day away from the city, renting a small beach cottage to clear our heads. It was a quiet escape, a chance to pause and reflect. Barack stood a few feet away, tossing pebbles into the water. Each stone skimmed the surface with effortless precision before disappearing beneath the waves. He looked calm, but I knew a storm brewed inside him, just as it did within me. We were both aware that our recent conversations had set something in motion, something larger than either of us could yet define. "Have you ever noticed how the water never stays still?" Barack said, glancing over his shoulder. "It's constantly changing, but it's still the same lake." I nodded, understanding his metaphor. Our relationship was like that. Changing, shifting, but still ours. The thought of venturing into unfamiliar territory was daunting, but maybe that was the point. To grow, we needed to be open to the waves, even if they sometimes felt too big. "I'm just afraid of losing control," I confessed, the words slipping out like a sigh. "What if we wade out too far, and the wave is bigger than we can handle?" He came to stand beside me, taking my hand in his. His grip was firm and reassuring, like an anchor tethering me to the shore. "I'm afraid too," he admitted. "But sometimes, to really feel alive, you have to step a little deeper into the water." We walked along the shoreline, the sand cool beneath our feet. Tabby, our ever-practical cat, had stayed home. The beach wasn't her scene. I imagined her lounging on the windowsill, her tail curled around her paws, watching the world with her usual air of detached curiosity. "Maybe we should start small," Barack suggested after a while. "Just imagine it first. Like a mental exercise. No pressure. Just us, creating a scenario together." "Like a rehearsal?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Exactly. A safe, controlled space where we can explore without any real-world stakes." It was a reasonable idea. Exploring in our minds, dipping our toes in rather than diving headfirst. It felt safer, more manageable. "Okay," I agreed. "We can try. But if I get uncomfortable, I'll say stop, and you'll stop." "Of course," he said, his voice steady. "This is our journey. We're in it together." We turned back toward the cottage, the warm wooden walls glowing in the fading afternoon light. Inside, the space was cozy, the faint scent of pine mixed with the salty breeze. Barack switched on an old record player, and the room filled with the smooth, mellow sounds of jazz. "Close your eyes," he murmured. I did as he asked. The world behind my eyelids was soft and undefined. Barack's voice was the only thing grounding me. "Imagine you're in a room. Not alone, but with people who are watching you. Not judging, just admiring. Every movement you make draws their attention." I took a deep breath, letting the idea take shape. Strangely, it didn't feel threatening. I pictured the eyes, curious, respectful, fascinated. Barack's presence was there too, a steady support beside me. "I'm with you," he continued, his voice low and calming. "Watching you shine. You're free, but we're still connected. This is our space." The image solidified. It wasn't frightening. It was liberating. This wasn't about anyone else. It was about us, crafting something new and vibrant together. "How do you feel?" he asked softly. "Good," I whispered. "Like we're actors on a stage, but the stage belongs to us." I opened my eyes and smiled. We hadn't taken any real steps into the unknown, but it felt like we had unlocked a door. A door we could open fully when, and if, we were ready. Barack smiled back, the warmth in his eyes reflecting my own. This was our first step, not a leap into chaos, but a careful exploration of new horizons. Tabby greeted us with a slow blink from her perch on the windowsill, her amber eyes wise and knowing. She seemed to sense that we were on the right path. And for the first time in a long while, I felt that too. Golden sunlight filtered through the bedroom curtains, drawing warm lines across the walls. I lay in bed, watching those streaks of light dance, feeling a deep sense of peace. At my feet, Tabby was curled into a perfect ball, her steady purring blending with the soft hum of the morning. It was one of those rare moments when everything felt perfectly still and perfectly right. Barack's hand rested gently in mine. He lay beside me, quiet, lost in thought. The silence between us wasn't heavy or strained. It was the kind of silence that felt comforting, like a shared understanding. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his voice soft, a trace of curiosity in his tone. "About us," I said, my lips curling into a smile. "How far we've come. And how, through it all, we've kept walking the same path." He smiled back, his eyes warm and steady. "Me too," he admitted. Sometimes it felt like we were balancing on a tightrope over a canyon. But each step made us more confident. I nodded. That's exactly how it had felt, a delicate balancing act between the familiar and the unknown. But with each conversation, each careful exploration, the rope beneath us had grown stronger. What we had built wasn't fragile. It was flexible, resilient. "I don't want to lose control," I murmured, more to myself than to him. "You won't," Barack assured me, his fingers tightening around mine. "We're in this together. If we get lost, we find our way back. Together." Tabby stirred, stretching her paws and letting out a soft meow, as if echoing his promise. She had been our quiet companion through all of this, a furry reminder that home was wherever we chose to create it. "So what's next?" he asked, tilting his head, a playful glint in his eyes. I laughed lightly. "Next. We keep being us. We keep talking, listening, and trusting. And if we come to another edge, we decide how to cross it. Together." His eyes softened, and he nodded. I like that plan. The simplicity of it warmed me. This journey we had started wasn't about changing who we were. It was about expanding how we loved and understood each other. We weren't rushing. We were learning, step by step, to trust not just in our love, but in the strength of our bond. I got up and walked to the window. Outside, the world bustled on. Neighbors walked their dogs, cars hummed by, and the wind rustled the trees. Everything looked the same, but I felt different. We were different. Not fundamentally, but in the way we now knew ourselves and each other more deeply. Barack joined me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. "Everything's going to be okay," he whispered. "I know," I replied, covering his hands with mine. We stood there, watching the world move on, while we stood still, anchored in each other. We weren't rushing toward any conclusion or resolution. We had all the time we needed, and that was enough. Tabby leapt onto the windowsill, her amber eyes reflecting the sunlight. She blinked slowly at us, that feline sign of trust and affection. It was as if she knew we'd find our way, no matter what. We had stepped out of our comfort zone, tested the waters, and come back stronger. Our love wasn't a fixed thing, but a living, breathing connection that grew with us. Like a river, always changing, always flowing, yet always the same. Barack kissed my temple, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like we were exactly where we were supposed to be. And whatever came next, I knew we'd face it, together,